Today we're going to start looking at a mysterious character. His name is Melchizedek. He's only mentioned in a few verses in the book of Genesis, and then not a word of him throughout the Bible except for what we're studying now, that's Hebrews 7. He's an intriguing figure. There is a lot that is said about him. And let's see what we can find out about him. For this Melchizedek, king of Salem, let me just stop there. King of Salem, the word Salem means peace. But does the word Salem remind you of any other name of a place that's significant? Jerusalem. A lot of people say that as the place that is called as Salem in the book of Genesis was actually Jerusalem of today, and he was the king of that region, and we will see more about the meaning of his name and such. He was not only a king, he was also a priest, which is a difficult dichotomy, who met Abraham as he was returning from the slaughter of the kings and blessed him. Now let me just stop there. Genesis 14 has the story of what happened to Abram at that time. His name was still Abram. Later on, God named him Abraham, but he was Abram. His nephew Lot and Abram had separated their ways because they were growing and they just could not sustain their lives and keep growing in the same spot. So one went one way, the other one went another way. As you know the story, Lot chose to be near Sodom and Gomorrah. And later on, we see how this affected him, his future, his family, and such. Those of us who want to be near Sodom and Gomorrah of today should take note. Stay away from worldliness and the centers of worldliness. Try to be in places where you could be away from the world and all of its pulls and temptations. That's a topic for another day. So as Lot was living there, these three kings from the other side of the tracks decided to declare war and attack that region, that's Sodom and Gomorrah. And along with everybody else, Lot and his family was also taken prisoner. Now, Abram hears this, and he puts together 315, I believe, of his most capable soldiers, and he goes and defeats these three kings and gets Lot and his family and his people out, and God gave him victory. And that's what he's talking about here in the Hebrews chapter 7 verse 1, where it says, who met Abraham as he was returning from the slaughter of the kings and blessed him, to whom also Abraham gave a tenth of the part of all the spoils, as was first of all, by the translation of his name, King of Righteousness, and then also King of Salem, which is the King of Peace. Now, because of this verse, a lot of theologians think that this is a Christophany. What is a Christophany? Let me just talk about that a little bit so you guys know what, if you hear the word Christophany, or in other places, some might say theophany. These are words that explain Jesus' appearance in the Old Testament. The pre-incarnate Christ showing up in the Old Testament is called Christophanies. Now, I have a real quick list I'm going to tell you guys so that I want you to know when you hear the word Christophany, or if you think or somebody asks you, did Jesus exist in the Old Testament, or did he ever show up, you will have the answer. So these are the places that you can see Jesus appearing in the Old Testament. Genesis 18. 3 men visit Abraham, and one of them is identified as the Lord, capital L. This visitor promises Abraham that Sarah will have a son. That's the first appearance of Jesus. Genesis 32. Jacob wrestles with a man all night, who is later revealed to be God. Jacob names the place Peniel, saying, I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered. Joshua 5. Joshua encounters a man with a drawn sword who identifies himself as the commander of the Lord's army. Joshua worships him, and the man instructs him to remove his sandals because he's standing on holy ground. And there are various appearances of the angel of the Lord. A lot of theologians say whenever you see the angel of the Lord in the Old Testament, that is also Jesus, that is also Christophany. For instance, in Genesis 16, the angel of the Lord appeared to Hagar and promised her numerous descendants. You know, she was about to die along with her child. They had no food, they had no water, and she called the place God who sees. And Jesus showed up over there, comforted her, gave her instructions, and he said, not only you're not going to die, you're going to multiply, and your descendants are going to be in millions. Exodus 3, the angel of the Lord appears to Moses in the burning bush and speaks as God. In Judges 6, the angel of the Lord appears to Gideon, calls him to save Israel from Midianites. In Judges 13, the angel of the Lord appears to Manoah and his wife, announcing the birth of Samson. In Daniel 3, a fourth figure described as looking like the Son of God appears in the fiery furnace and saves Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These are Christophanies. These are the places where you see Jesus in the Old Testament. So that's why when theologians read this verse 2, because of his office, because of his name, they say Melchizedek is Jesus in the Old Testament. Because he shows up out of nowhere, he disappears, we don't know his genealogy. He shows up in the book of genealogy. He shows up in Genesis, which is a book of genealogy. But yet there's no information about his birth, his lineage, his life, or what happened to him later on. Just 3 verses, that's all. So, and a lot of theologians don't agree with that. A lot of them say this is just a type of Christ in the Old Testament. So you can make up your own mind on that. Without father, verse 3, without mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but made like the Son of God, he remains a priest perpetually. Now observe how great this man was, to whom Abraham, the patriarch, gave a tenth of the choicest spoils. Now, the writer of Hebrews, as you know, is going somewhere with this. Why is he talking about Melchizedek? Why is he talking about tithing? Remember the big picture. He is writing to the Jewish believers of the time. And they were struggling with going back to Judaism. They were struggling with trying to hold on to the law of Moses and yet still be Christians. They were struggling with legalism and symbolism and certain rites and traditions. And the writer of Hebrews is trying to save them from all that, to clean and pure faith. And the only way to make sure somebody understands their faith is through knowledge. And that's why we teach the Bible here, guys. That's why we're not big on ceremony. We're big on teaching. Because only if you know, you can make the right choice. Faith is not about feelings. Faith is about substance, knowledge, making clear-headed decisions, and faith is about trust. Feelings are murky. They take you different places. A lot of times it's not the right place. Anyway, let's continue. He gave a tithe. Interesting. Tithe is a concept that has been practiced in the Old Testament, which is giving 10% of your increase to the temple. Now, interesting point about this is this. At this point in history, Moses was not even born yet, let alone the law was given to him. We're talking about Abraham, the first guy that God called to himself and promised that he's going to be a great nation. Hundreds of years later, Moses came along. This is Abraham. How does Abraham know anything about tithing before the law was given? And who is this Melchizedek who is a priest of God? Where did he come from? I thought it was only about Abraham and he was the only one. What do you guys think about this? When we're reading the biblical narrative in the Old Testament, we see Adam, and then Noah, and then Abraham, and we watch history through the lens of Abraham and his descendants. Who is this guy Melchizedek? How did he become a priest of God? Do you think maybe God does things outside of our knowledge? I propose to you, yes, he does. Just because we are not given exactly what God does, doesn't mean he's not doing certain things. Remember the Old Testament prophet to whom God said, don't worry, I have 5,000 people over there. You know nothing about them. You're not the only one, was Elijah. He was depressed. Lord, they've killed everyone. I'm the only one that's left. God said, no, there's 5,000 other people there. Don't worry, I got this. In the beginning, this is a controversial issue. It's just great mental exercise. But Adam and Eve, his children, Cain and Abel, right? He killed his brother, and he was afraid. And when God said, why are you afraid? What did he say? He said, they are going to kill me. Who are they? I thought it was only Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel. Who are these other people? Where'd they come from? You see, just because we don't know everything God does, doesn't mean he's not doing anything. And this is one of the examples. Melchizedek, he's a priest, he's a king of God. It's not only Abraham he's dealing with. And I say this to encourage you. A lot of times you might feel alone and lonely or forsaken and not knowing what's the future for you. Just because you don't see what God is doing doesn't mean he's not doing anything. Take courage in this. All right, let's continue. We have a lot to talk about. And those indeed of the sons of Levi who received the priest's office have commandment in the law to collect the tenth from the people, that is from their brethren, although these are descendants of Abraham. But the one whose genealogy is not traced from the collected tenth from Abraham, bless the one who had the promises. And without any dispute, the lesser is blessed by the greater. What is he saying? Let me just sum it up for you. He's saying, look, this Melchizedek is greater than Abraham. And he blessed him. He's building up to a point. He says, in the law, God gave this priest office to Aaron and Levites. They were supposed to collect the tithes from the people. But in this case, Abraham is giving the tithe to somebody else. He's making the point, Levites and Aaron comes from Abraham. He was supposed to receive the tithe. But he didn't. He gave the tithe to somebody else. His point is this: there is someone greater than Abraham and the priestly office. There's a greater office of the high priest. He is not of the lineage of Abraham. Are you following me? He's going there to make and illustrate a point. Because they were so stuck on following the tradition of Abrahamic law, Mosaic law, he's showing that Jesus is the greater high priest. So don't get just lost in this law. Follow the greater high priest. He's going through all this to make this point to them. For it is attested for him, you are a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. For the one who had, there is a setting aside of a former commandment because of its weakness and uselessness. For the law made nothing perfect, and on the other hand, there is a bringing in of a better hope through which we draw near to God. Insomuch as not without any oath, for they indeed became priests without an oath, but he with an oath through the one who said to him, the Lord has sworn and will not change his mind, you are a priest forever. Now he's talking about Jesus here. This is an excerpt from Psalm 110. So much more also Jesus has become the guarantee of a better covenant. So, and he continues making the point that Jesus is a greater high priest than the priest of the Old Testament. And he proves it to them. But for our purposes today, he spent this time talking to them, writing to them, and proving to this audience that Jesus is the real high priest, and the ceremonial priests are not really the ones that you should go after. They did their job for a time. Now that Jesus showed up, their time is over. Now this is what it communicated to them. How about to us? The fact that Jesus is the high priest today for us in 2024, how does that change your life? Don't forget, Bible is a living and active document. He speaks to the past, the present, and the future. So what is this knowledge speaking to you? How does this change your life? In a different way of asking you. Well, one, the fact that Jesus is the high priest like Melchizedek gives us access to God. Imagine having a VIP pass to an event. If you have that pass, you have access to the event. You don't have to mess around with anything else, lines, this, that. You just show it, whoop, you're in. Okay? Because of Jesus' high priestly office, those of you who are following him have the same access to God. Remember I said earlier, 2 more songs, there's going to be time for prayer. And I said not everybody has that privilege. I wasn't kidding. You have that privilege to go before the throne of God that not everybody else has. If you surrendered your life to Jesus, if you're truly following him, you have that access. You've been born again. You can go before the creator of heaven and earth with all your problems and issues, with your thanksgiving and your concerns, your pains and your joys. You can go before him. He cares. He's listening. He loves you. If he didn't, he wouldn't come down here to live a human life and be tortured and killed for our sins. He loves us. He does want the best for us. Yes, we will have difficult times. Well, let's just make sure that those difficult times are not because of our boneheaded decisions. That's one. Two, if things come our way and we're going through a difficult time, remember that it's temporary. Just do the right thing that God is calling you to do. And in the perfect time, he will change the circumstance. It will happen so fast that you will even be amazed. Just trust him and keep doing the right thing. So he gives us access to God. And he is the eternal intercessor. He's constantly interceding for us. You know what that means? That means he's always praying and acting on behalf of you. It's kind of like having a lawyer constantly advocating for you in a court of law. Constantly. Not taking breaks, not waiting for payments, not waiting to schedule things. He's always there. He's always interceding for you. That's the high priestly office. The fact that he was the high priest in the Old Testament offered a sacrifice once a year on the Day of Atonement for the sins of people. The fact that he's the high priest, he offered his own life in a perfect way so that all of our sins have been forgiven and we've been cleansed. It's as though all the sin that you committed has never happened. He washed the slate clean. He cleansed you of all of that. Because he was perfect, I didn't have to be. But again, this is not a license to sin. I have to mention this every single time. Every sin has its consequence. The fact that we can't be perfect doesn't mean we shouldn't try to be honest with you. We all have weaknesses, we all have issues that we deal with. We can't just pretend like they never happened. We have to deal with them, we have to confront them, we have to take it head on and deal with them. So he was the perfect sacrifice. He paid the sin debt. It's kind of like this. Let's say that you have a mortgage that you can never pay. And you're going to lose this house and you're going to be homeless with your family and kids. You don't know where to go, what's going to happen, where the kids are going to grow up. This is really not a great town to begin with, but even this house that you have, you're about to lose because you cannot pay the mortgage. All of a sudden, somebody comes in and pays the mortgage in full and says, live here. Not only that, I'm building a different town somewhere else. A lot better than this. You can also live there once it's completed. That's what it means to have him pay our sin debt. Not only he paid our debt to God, he's preparing somewhere so much better for us. When it's time, you're all going to be there. The fact that he's a high priest, it gives us guidance and strength. I used this illustration before. It's kind of like a lighthouse guiding ships safely through the storm. He's immovable. He points to the way. as we keep looking at him, get our direction from him, he guides us to safety. It's only when we take our eyes off of him, when we start looking at the clouds and the storms and the darkness, when we start looking at our own weaknesses, when we start looking at the circumstances around us, well, how is this ever going to happen when I am X, Y, and Z, whatever it is? Keep your eyes on Jesus. It sounds like a cliche, but it's like a lighthouse. He will direct your path. He will show you where to go. In the darkness, in the clouds, in the uncertainty, in the storms of life, look to the light. Keep your eyes on him. He will show you the way. We can rely on Jesus for direction, support in difficult circumstances. And this reliance will give us clarity. Oh, how we all need clarity in life, don't we? So many decisions to make, so many things we're dealing with and struggling with, so many questions we need clarity for. He has them. So how do we get there? Through spiritual nourishment. Melchizedek gave him bread and wine. And does it also sound like something else? Old Testament priest is giving Abraham bread and wine, and New Testament, Jesus did what? What do we do here? It's communion. Bread and wine. It's nourishment. Regularly engaging with Jesus through prayer, through reading the Bible, and through participating in church. Fellow believers, very important. It nourishes you. I get it. Churches are not perfect because we are not perfect. You know the cliche. If you find a perfect church, don't go there. You will ruin it. There is no such thing as a perfect church. We have different people. We have different characters. We have people with different weaknesses. We have people with different gifts. We have different people with different abilities. And everybody, including from pastors on down, everybody is on a journey to grow. Okay? The important thing is to know that you need to grow and seek that nourishment from the Lord through reading his word, through spending time with him. So, my time is up. But the fact that Jesus is the high priest changes my life this way today, giving me access, giving me all this, forgiving me, guiding me, nourishing me. That's why it matters to me today and to you today in year 2020.